Green Crow Inn, a novel by Derek A. Kamal, read by Kelman Friedman. Chapter 21. The Leaving. I woke to the sound of sleet pelting the roof of the Green Crow Inn. It was not yet the wet season, but a kind of foretaste. The snows had paused, and the air, perhaps warmed by the sea far to the west, turned white flakes to miserable sleet. I imagined the stilts doing their job. The homes of Newari, when the rain came in earnest, would go flood-free this year, as they did each year. The inn would survive another of the heavy rains that came down off Tila Hill, and Calca the innkeeper would bake her pies, and the drink would flow, and all would be well. But it wasn't well. Not for me, at least. For though I'd spent much time in this place, and learned much and gained many a new tale, leaving felt like a great blow. I, son of a councilman, aristocrat of the capitals, was sad to leave the employ of a rustic country inn. Though, I suppose, that's half the reason I came this way to begin with. That morning I assessed myself in the mirror. It was a chore I'd avoided as much as I was able throughout the early winter, so not very much, but it seemed the cold, along with the months, had aged me. Lines were there that perhaps had not existed before. Who can tell, really? And was I sad? Whiskers were now nearly become a proper beard, either thanks to Blett's serum or in spite of it. I hadn't the time to shape my facial hair properly, which I felt was a good thing. Best not to keep Father waiting. For he would be waiting, wide awake, properly dressed, smiling, perhaps on his second cup of tea with juniper if we had any juniper left. My beard sagged along with the corners of my mouth. Was I sad? No. Glad. My time at the inn was over for the present. Opportunity awaited in the capitals. Nundia would be with me, for a little while at least, and I could come back, this being an inn and all. Only a few days' ride from Callahame as well. The Green Crow was best experienced as a guest, anyway. Then I could make Furrier carry my bags. Poor old Furrier. No, things were not so sad. Father was, in fact, sipping tea at the bar when I finally came down. Muted light passing through the clouds did what it could to brighten the common area for the few other early risers. Sleet made the task difficult. A trio of women sat by the window breaking their fast. The common room remained unchanged in spite of my months of persistent suggestion. The same assortment of paintings and maps and aught else stood silent, ready to wish me farewell. The last of the Yuletide ornamentation had been taken down after the New Year 3 days ago. "Son," Arn said to me. I did not reply and made no gesture, but sat down for the cup of tea he had poured for me. "All prepared?" I nodded in a defeated way. "I must say, a few days spent at this quaint little spot has done wonders for my back." He smiled, as if to show opposition to my sullen mood. "Perhaps we shall open such an inn back in the capitals." "Too rustic," I murmured. "Well, that's just the thing. All the hostelry and lodging in Callahame is so stuffy. Either too stuffy, or too ghastly if you're in the wrong part of town." Arn looked around wistfully, as if remembering simpler times he had never experienced. "Something like this would go over well, and I'm sure it would be a fine slice of home for your friend. What was her name?" I met his gaze. "Nundia." "Yes, lovely name. She'll be joining us, then?" "For a little while. As I said, she has some people to speak to in Theaheim, though she wasn't very specific with me." My father nodded knowingly. "Perhaps that is well, and perhaps she'll stay. Wouldn't be a bad time of life to consider a relationship." I kept my eyes fixed on him. "She won't. She lives on the hill." He nodded again after a leisurely sip of tea. The nod was meant to say, "You know best," but a lifetime as his son meant I understood its true meaning. "I know best, and you'll see that soon enough." The sound of a chair sliding against wooden slats broke my simmering anger. "I am going to be missing you, Torsen." Sumikine smiled warmly and honestly as she sat down. I noticed Furrier leaning against the doorway to the courtyard. He did not approach me. "Likewise, Sumi. Knowing you has been a great joy." I caught the finality of my words, and quickly added, "And I'll see you again soon, of course." The little dwarf woman then gave me a strong hug I was not expecting. The air fled my lungs, and I gasped in surprise. Then I relaxed. The hug lasted longer than I would normally prefer, but I let the care and embrace seep into me as a parting gift. When at last she let me go, her eyes wet with tears, Nandaya was there. She wrung her hands anxiously, perhaps not wanting to interrupt my moment with Sumi. Then she said, "We should go, I think." "Quite right," shouted Arn. He looked askance at the undignified embrace Sumi had given me, and I never considered that this man had, perhaps, never seen a dwarfened man offer one another such affection. We rose to our feet, and I gave Sumi one last affectionate look. She winked and wiped a tear away. In the rear yard was our ride. Gilrad, munching on an apple, had Ivo attached to a well-prepared cart and a pleasant expression on his face. I nodded to him, and he nodded back, and that was all. A flicker of motion caught my attention. Kalka stood in the window of her office looking down on us. When our eyes locked, she vanished, and I sighed a long, sad sigh, and climbed aboard the cart with Nandaya. Arn rode his own horse behind us. Nandaya clicked her tongue, and Ivo was on her way. The sleet showed no sign of stopping, so I pulled the hood of my cloak tighter around my neck. We rounded the long drive to the front of the inn, and then onto the narrow path to the road. As the cart began to clatter down the thoroughfare, I looked back at the Green Crow Inn. Kalka was there, leaning with her arms crossed against the great doors. She swiftly turned and went back inside. Luncheon would begin soon, and she had work to do, and I, huckster and layabout, would be just another among so many memories, so many formers of her employ. But Sumi Kind lingered in the door and waved sadly. I returned the wave as she shrank with the distance. My last view of the Green Crow had me thinking of Furrier. I hope he was intact, in spite of all that had transpired, and somehow I knew he was. Then I felt a hand on mine, looked to Nandaya, and her meek, comforting smile blasted away all pain. I nodded, she nodded, and the road was before us. This has been The Green Crow Inn by Derek A. Kamal, read by Calvin Friedman, with music by Michael Elliott. To find out more, including how to purchase your copy of the novel, please visit shorelessskies.com.